Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby.
Hello and welcome to Movies vs. Capitalism, an anti-capitalist movie podcast. This is Frank.
And this is Rivka. And we've decided we're jumping right in because this is a story we've been wanting to talk about for a while.
We have. Yep. We've been waiting to talk about this story. We've had to put it off because the goddamn Academy Awards happened and then other stuff happened that we had to talk about. But this is an important story because this is our beat. This is the intersection of entertainment and labor organizing in this case. So what are we talking about today, Riv?
We're talking about the Alamo Drafthouse movie theater strike. Particularly, yes. This is in Brooklyn. And Frank, you're gonna tell us more about this story. But if you're in Brooklyn, if you have ever been to an Alamo Drafthouse movie theater, it's one of those where you get to eat food, lay
you get
out,
to lounge about in a chair,
lounge about. Mm-hmm. It's a nice experience, but there's a lot of labor involved that is not involved in your ordinary movie theater. So there's a lot. It's full service. So it's a restaurant and a movie theater.
Restaurant and a movie theater, and they're doing concessions, and they're
and drinks.
Drinks and a bar, and they're walking around in the dark, trying to make
sure not to disrupt your movie viewing experience. Yeah,
trying not to disrupt, also not trip and fall over in the middle in a dark theater carrying food and drinks.
That too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they have really great healthcare, Frank.
Yeah, exactly. That's why they went on strike, because they love their healthcare so much. So this actually, I learned, so we have two Alamo Drafthouses in New York City that are now on strike, the Lower Manhattan location and the downtown Brooklyn location. They also join an Alamo Drafthouse in Sloan Lake, Colorado, which also is on strike as of a few weeks ago. They are the three unionized Alamo Drafthouses out of 42 locations nationwide. Or at least they are the three on strike. I don't know if there are others that are unionized. So the strike is happening in response to at least in the New York City locations, a mass layoff of 70 employees, in which the union filed an unfair labor practice charge with the NLRB because the company declared an impasse on layoffs, even though both parties continued to negotiate for a contract. They've been trying to negotiate. They won a union over a year ago. And like so many of these fucking corporate entities, they've been in negotiations for a contract for over a year, which is a standard tactic from, we've seen it at Amazon, Starbucks, which have now seen, increased union drives. These companies just are like, all right, cool, you won a union, but like, we're just going to drag out negotiations as long as fucking possible and hope that, I don't know, Trump put some people into the NLRB that make this almost impossible. So here we are.
Yeah, it's but I guess as you were speaking, I was like, I don't. There have been videos throughout the past month where you can see those workers who are striking. There was one, I think, where you saw a leader who, right before they went on strike, speaking to fellow workers, and I just think they're so valuable for this point in time to be able to go and watch that if you haven't seen it, because sometimes I think, particularly in this moment when a lot of people are freelance, a lot of people are like, I don't even know how I would use my worker power to strike back. Mm-hmm. It's nice to just, it's so, to me, it's really helpful to just see examples of oh, that's what it looks like. Oh, that's what it sounds like.
Sure.
If you've never been, and if you're in Brooklyn, if you're in New York, you can go out and see the picket line. Frank, you walked through the picket line, right? Didn't you speak to some?
I didn't cross the picket line. Hang on.
No, sorry.
Be careful. No. I was in the vicinity of the picket line.
Yes, he went to. Yeah.
Yes. Well, actually, this is a good point, and to dovetail off of what you're saying. So, one of the downtown Brooklyn location of Alamo is at this place called City Point, which is, I don't know how it's just like a giant.
It's a mall.
It's a mall.
It's a Brooklyn mall.
It's
the
Brooklyn
closest
mall.
to a mall you're going to get in Brooklyn.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like, there's like a Target on one floor. There's an Alamo on another floor. There's like a Primark. There's a Sephora. The bottom floor has a Trader Joe's. I was there for the Trader Joe's. And like a giant food court, food hall type situation. So just like a bunch of different commercial, both food and other retail spaces. But Alamo is part of that. And so I was going to Trader Joe's to grocery shop, which also does not great labor practices, but unfortunately still some of the most affordable groceries in New York City. So
true.
Here we are. I saw the picket line and they're like, hey, we're on strike. Alamo's on strike. And I was like, I would never go see a movie while you guys are on strike. Absolutely not. And they're like, thank you. I was just chatting with one of the organizers for a minute. I got their donation links, which we are going to post in the episode description in your podcast player, for their strike funds and for their for the fund for their laid off employees.
Amazing.
But yeah, it's and they've been very clear in why they unionized and why they are now striking, because Alamo Drafthouse sold to Sony a few years ago. So Sony is the new corporate owner, and I'm going to read a quote from one of the union reps. This is not the Alamo Drafthouse we have supported and built over the years. This is Sony, their new corporate owner, pulling the strings, attempting to silence our collective voice and strip us of our power. But we refuse to be silent, and we refuse to be powerless. So, I mean, we've heard this story time in memoriam. Alamo wasn't little, but like a company sells to a larger corporate entity, and then that corporate entity is just like, okay, now we're only viewing everything as numbers on a spreadsheet, and we're going to maximize profit and do whatever ruthless business shit we need to in order to squeeze labor as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that they have to do this, but super admirable, super important, like I was saying, because it's going to they're leading by example. Like worker power is where it's at. And
yes.
Like where it's going to be at. It's kind of like our only point of power left.
Oh, and what I was going to say that I forgot, the point that I was getting to, it's very, like you're saying, for visibility, like the Alamo workers have been pretty good on social media, like their digital strategy, as people say in the biz, to like make their organizing as visible as possible, it's, a lot of it, especially online on social media, is just storytelling. And they've been telling a very compelling story. But then this strike being literally right outside of City Point, like right outside the doors. So if you're going to that Target, if you're going to that Trader Joe's, if you're going to eat in that food hall, like you got to pass by that picket line. And that visibility is also extremely important and valuable, especially for other workers in at City Point. I'm sure like Target workers are walking by the Alamo workers and being like, wait, what the hell? What's a strike? What can we do? What's a union? What do we do? How do we do that? So yeah, it's solidarity with the Alamo Drafthouse workers. Again, we'll post the link to support them, but you can also find all of their info at beacons.ai/NYC Alamo United. That's beacons as in a light beacon. beacons.ai/NYC Alamo United.
That's really amazing because it's such a direct way to be able to support these workers, and you know what it's going towards. Like that's what's needed when you're on strike, is to be able to support yourself. So I'm excited to have this link. Thank you for getting that, Frank.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we'll keep an eye on this, but we've been wanting to talk about it for a while. Go check it out. We have a really great conversation today, but before we get to it, we want to remind our audience that, we don't sell ads on this show because we rely completely on your community support to keep it going. And you can help us out by subscribing to our Patreon.
That's right. For just $5 a month, you get access to all of our new bonus episodes, all of our old bonus episodes, and you can find that link in the episode description in your podcast player, or you can just go to your web browser and type in mvcpod.com. Also on your podcast player, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to this show so that you don't miss new episodes and so that other people can find the show because of, the algorithm. The more engagement we get, the more blah, 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 blah. So yeah, that would be a huge help. And thank you.
And a reminder, we donate our ad space. So if you're part of a leftist or progressive organization and you want to run an ad on this program, email us at moviesvscapitalism@gmail.com.
All right, we're going to take a break, but we'll be right back with our conversation about Be Kind, Rewind with Jesse Jae Hoon.
Hey everyone, we've got a great organization we want to tell you about called Theater Workers for a Ceasefire. They organize US-based theater workers in solidarity with the people of Palestine. The easiest campaign to plug into is the PAC-B working group.
Rivka, what is PAC-B?
Great question, Frank. It stands for the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. It's basically the cultural wing of the BDS movement. Since 2004, it has organized with partners globally to end all forms of cultural and academic complicity with apartheid Israel as the most meaningful form of pressure to compel it to comply with international law.
The working group meets every other week, and the goal is to enlist theatrical organizations to take up PAC-B's guidelines for divestment from Israel's genocide and occupation. It's open to anyone who lives in the US and works in theater.
Theater Workers for a Ceasefire also hosts events in New York like teach-ins and organizes contingents for marches and protests.
You can learn more, join the group, or support their work at tw4c.com. Theater Workers for Ceasefire, tw4c.com, or find them on Instagram at Theater Workers for Ceasefire.
Love you, comrades. Now back to the show.
Okay, today on the pod, we are joined by Jesse Jae Hoon. Jesse is a playwright and an organizer based in Queens, New York. He was the Creatives Rebuild New York resident playwright at Ma Yi Theater Company and a current member of the Public Theater's Emerging Writers Group. He's developed work with New York Theater Workshop, The Playwrights Realm, Rattlestick Theater, the O'Neill Theater Center, and more, and he is an MFA from CUNY Hunter College. Jesse, welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I feel like it's been a little bit coming. I know that Frank and I talked about having you on, and I think we bumped into each other maybe over the summer at an organizing event. And yeah, I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, me too. I feel like I have been listening for several months. I rammed into you guys. I'm just very excited to be on and talking about movies, which I need to see more of.
I'm very excited to chat with you, Jesse. I don't know if Rivka told me about you and your work, or if maybe I just encountered you on social media somehow, but you are, as we mentioned, a playwright. For anyone who if this is your first time listening to this show, Rivka and I also went to theater school. That's where we met. And you are very, very forward with your leftist politics, at least on social from what I have seen. So
everywhere, yeah.
Good. Not just posting. Posting is not going to save us. But
posting's not organizing, folks.
Posting is not organizing. But I would love to hear about your political evolution and journey. And also, I'm curious, do you encounter a lot of people in the theater world that have a more left rather than liberal politics? Because at least when we were coming up in it, and when I was still very much in it, it was very much felt like liberal institutions.
I'm sad to report that the structure of the theater itself is obviously very liberal. It is very, rooted in the nonprofit structure. The people, it depends. I think sometimes it tends to be a little more disparate around when it comes to ideology. I do hear some very, very interesting ideas bopping around in theater that I think could align with a more left socialist ideology, but that's always there. I think the theory of change right now in theater is very rooted in kind of a liberal idea of sort of marketplace of ideas, or a very sort of antiquated kind of Obama liberalism. But there's some wonderful people despite that.
Yeah. And what about you? Yeah, a little bit about just your sort of how have you always been writing from this leftist perspective as a playwright? Is this something that did your
politics emerge as you were sort of studying, I guess, at Hunter? What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote my first play in 2018, and it wasn't really, it dealt with Vietnamese migrant workers in Germany, and it kind of like dealt with the rise of the far right, specifically like in Germany in response to a lot of the immigrants that have been coming in from Syria and Turkey and Vietnam.
Oh wow!
In Germany,
can I ask if it's a modern? Is it set during a modern time, or is it set during like the 30s?
It's set during 2006.
Okay.
But I grew up part-time in Germany, actually, so several other of my plays have dealt with Germany. I just got done workshopping a show with New York Theater Workshop about the Cop Putsch, which is, if for folks who don't know, was an attempted far-right coup in Berlin in 1920, which was put down by a general strike organized by Social Democrats and communists and socialists, which then extended into a kind of communist uprising in the Ruhr Valley, which were then put down by the Freikorps, who started the Cop Putsch in the first place. So it kind of mirrored a lot of classic sort of liberal dynamics of, we have to put down the far right, but then we need the far right to put down the communists. So I started off from a place of kind of just being interested in that Vietnamese German migrant community. But I had started organizing at that time with DSA in 2018. And when I was in grad school at Hunter, the Hunter program, I wrote about 7 plays there. That's when I kind of started to become I started to become more interested in mixing my politics and my organizing life with the plays I was writing.
Hell yeah. Hell yes. That's fascinating. I love, because like stories like that are stories that I'd never even considered even existed. And I love like the hyper specificity of your lived experience and your worldview coming into your work. I haven't read any of these plays, but I imagine they're very good, just because, something we always learned in theater school, and especially as I was, as Rivka and I both also transition into writing, is the specific is the universal. Like the more you can excavate from your own personal lived experience, even if it's in a setting or centered around a community that you have no connection to, just bringing your own personal experience ends up resonating so much more with a wider audience. So very excited to check out your work.
Yeah, I'm always intrigued also by writers who are intentional about their politics. That's something that I think comes up all the time when we're looking at films of, even when we find them to be deeply political, like, what was this intentional? It's amazing when it is or it isn't, but I think that's really important, the intentionality. So excited to learn more about your work. Let's dive into the movie that we're talking about today. Talking about, what were you going to say, Frank?
Stoked to talk about this movie because I have a long journey with it, which we will discuss. Today we are talking about Be Kind, Rewind, released in 2008, written and directed by Michel Gondry, starring Mos Def, Jack Black, Danny Glover, Melanie Diaz, and Mia Farrow. The budget for this movie was $20 million, and it grossed roughly $30.6 million worldwide. Okay, so it made its money back.
Good for them.
Happy
Good for
to
you,
hear.
Michelle. A brief synopsis. If you've never seen this movie, we will be spoiling it. In Passaic, New Jersey, Mike and his eccentric friend Jerry work at a small, struggling video store owned by Mike's foster father, Mr. Fletcher. When Jerry accidentally erases all of the tapes in the store after a bizarre accident, the duo decide to cover up the mistake by remaking popular films with homemade special effects. Their quirky versions, including a Ghostbusters remake, start gaining a cult following, and as they try to save the store from foreclosure and preserve its place in history, they also discover the importance of community, creativity, and their friendship.
That's right. So some historical context. The year is 2008. Other films that we've covered on this podcast from that year include 27 Dresses and The Dark Knight.
Wow.
So I'm excited that
What a year.
this rounds it out. The holy triangle.
The three best films of that year.
Yep.
George W. Bush, I'm sorry to say, is still the president, but then Senator Barack Obama had just won the 2008 presidential election, inheriting one of the worst U.S. economic crises since the Great Depression. That's right, the mortgage market is in collapse. The Dow Jones Industrial Average has lost 33.8% of its value. General Motors and Ford Motor Company both reported record losses. And, of course, the Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. But don't worry, they won't be hurting for too long. Citigroup, the nation's largest bank, reported a fourth quarter loss for 2007 that approached $10 billion. Bank of America took over Countrywide Financial, the nation's largest mortgage lender. And property prices continued to fall in the U.S. and Europe, causing hardship for both homeowners and financial institutions. So it's safe to say shit was really bad. But of course, we had hope. And then we know what Obama did with that hope.
Yeah. We solved, we ended racism.
Absolutely. We broke up the banks.
Obama's election. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We know who got that hope, the big banks. Just in case that didn't give you enough context, the most popular song of the year was Low by Flo Rida featuring T-Pain. And the most popular TV show was, of course, American Idol. Eggs, I needed to put this in, cost $2.29 a dozen. And in March, Hulu was launched.
What? Hulu launched in 2008?
I didn't realize they were that old, honestly.
Me neither.
Yeah, I think it was. Let me double. I mean, now you're making me want to check my facts, but Hulu launched when? I mean, I did this on, March 12th, 2008.
Holy
I think they
shit.
were one of the first streaming services. I just don't think anyone used it.
Yeah, it was back when like you could only watch it on your desktop or laptop. And it was the network's place to like license and syndicate stuff.
Right. It was NBC owned. So 2008.
Wow.
Was a year of transition. What a time.
So Jesse, the first thing we start our conversations with, we ask our guest, why did you choose this movie to talk about on an anti-capitalist movie podcast?
You know, I saw this movie twice in theaters when it came out in good old 2008. And there's something about this film where it's like, I don't see it as an anti-capitalist film, really, but it deals so well with like material conditions for working people in a very direct way. Mm-hmm. And it shows a kind of the beauty of working class life in a way that's not condescending. It doesn't feel like it is saying these are conditions from which you must escape. It doesn't feel like it's saying that these people are any less valid or important because they are poor. And I think it gave a lot of necessary oxygen to people who like wanted to see their problems represented on screen, which I mean like economically. I mean, if you look at films like in the present day, it's very hard to find films that are dealing with economics in a way that is representative of how working people experience them now. And so I see this film as kind of a little gem, as people who, I think Gondry really does understand working people in a way that is, it feels like he's speaking on their level. Parts of it haven't aged well. I don't necessarily consider it anti-capitalist. I don't even necessarily consider it anti-gentrification. It's not really, it deals with gentrification, but it's not really, the film is not making any real bold statement on gentrification, but it does look at the material conditions of working people's lives in a way that I think is very unusual for our time now, anyway. Yes,
I completely agree with everything you just laid out, especially for 2008. It's very, very strange to see a movie about what is essentially a deindustrialized community. I mean, they don't point to deindustrialization as the reason that this community is, in more dire economic straits, but you get that feeling of this used to be a vibrant community. There used to be some sort of industry. I mean, they had the jazz industry, which is a big part of the movie. But to see a movie about that centers that, made in 2008, you're right. It's very surprising looking back on it. Just a quick side note: the movie. You ever seen the movie The Big Green, the children's soccer comedy from like the early 2000s, late 90s? That movie does the exact same thing, and it's crazy. It's all about how this town just was like completely deindustrialized, and like this soccer team comes together to like lift the town up and bring the community together, whatever. But to see stories like that in this time you're like, how did they sneak this through here? I also saw this movie in 2008, and Jesse, I am ashamed to admit that I walked out of it.
Whoa.
Oh my
God.
God.
Both Jesse and
A
Rivka's
theater?
mouths just went agape. Yeah, at the movie theater. And you know me, Riv, like I don't not finish movies. I don't walk out of movies. We're in the middle of college, and for whatever reason, I was like, I fucking hate this, and I'm walking out. I cannot believe, I don't even know what it was at the time that did it. I just was so put off by it. I didn't think it was funny. I wasn't emotionally compelled at all. I don't remember. I'm taking. I think it might have been the magnetized P. I think I was so excited for it because I'm pretty sure this was Gondry's follow-up to Eternal Sunshine, if I'm remembering his filmography correctly, and I was a huge Sunshine fan, and I was stoked for this movie because I love Jack Black and Mos Def, and I was like, oh, this is them going to be doing like movie sketches. I'm going to love this. And it just didn't. I don't know. Maybe it was an expectation thing, but I'll totally take the L on this one. I was completely wrong because I really loved it watching it now in 2025.
Wow. Yeah, I don't have any recollection of going to theaters to see it or seeing it previously. But I so agree with you. It was like such a gem, and sitting down and like being like, oh, what is this lovely film? But I think two things you said, Jesse. One about like the lack of condescension, particularly towards the working class, particularly in this moment, in 2025, when we've had nothing but feels like condescension towards like the working class from all over, but particularly like a certain liberal toned condescension, which I think a lot of movies are coated with, was like just so lovely. We'll get into it, but there's like a particular moment with Jack Black and Mos Def that I was like, oh, or like where they call him in. There's a lot of like calling in. And I was like, oh, there's so much to learn actually from this movie. And I was like emotional at the end of it. I just felt like reinvigorated towards like the purpose of making art, and like particularly making art within your own communities, particularly like that kind of artivism, like that, my favorite projects that I've made, like kind of, it felt like I was reflected back an understanding of like, oh, that's why they felt so fucking good to like, be it in a classroom, or even I had moments of like as a kid of being like, that's why that was so fun, when you would just like get with your friends and put something and then watch it back, and you're like, that is actually like before everything was commodified and celebrity took over and like fucking took everyone's minds away and made them think that like they want to be influencers and like be alone and only do this, like, So I was just like, I want to see all my old VHSs. So I just thought that was so moving to see at the end, especially that image of like the reflection of the film they make about their community at the end reflected back on the community's faces, was like, oh, this is in that sense anti-capitalist for sure, in the place of like what it means to make art. It was anti-commodity, art is commodity, yeah. Yeah,
and it feels like anti-alienation too, because there is a sense of like,
yes,
in the quest to Hollywoodify or Marvelify every piece of cinema that we have, and to place it in the context of like economics or, you know, box office or celebrity, it is a really, really wonderful thing to see people like view and portray art as a thing for people to do in their neighborhood with other people, and to really like humanize kind of everybody in that neighborhood, because you have, you know, the people who Jack Black and Mos Def, they're scared of like the hoodlums in the neighborhood, but they're like just, they all portray them as just people who love movies and to want to make things together. And there is a hunger that I think gets filled in this movie within the context of the Sweden films, where I think there is a sort of a hole you see in these people's lives as they have been alienated from a lot of what made their community and their neighborhood special to them. And I think it really, really shows the role that art can play in bringing people closer to reality and to the world around them.
It's also such a smart parallel they draw between the town having historically been centered around jazz and this famous jazz musician, Fats Waller, and now the community coming together for these movies, because it is, what they're doing is very jazz. It is very kind of like, oh, we're all just going to kind of show up and play a part, and I'm going to follow your lead and you're going to do this thing. But now we found this spontaneous moment. Oh, actually, this part kind of sounds bad. We won't do that anymore. It has a very like organic, spontaneous growth to it as these people find that, one, they enjoy these movies better. I think Mia Farrow at one point, they're like doing a toast and she's like, to movies with heart. And that I think speaks to what you're saying, Jesse, about, you know, just like how the glossy, sterile marvelification of movies can just leave you even as an audience member and a consumer feeling alienated from the movie that you're even watching. And then getting to watch this community come together around this historical landmark and just having like a shared interest and a shared thing you get to work on together. Like, it's fun. It's like fun, like being out there and like doing stuff. It makes me think about when Pokemon Go was happening and everyone was out in the streets and we're like, what did you find? You got a Pikachu over there? Oh my God. Not the same thing, obviously, but like, I've talked about that moment. I've talked about Pokemon Go several times on this podcast. It was one of the best moments of community I've ever felt in my life.
Pokemon Sweden, baby.
Yeah.
Well, I think there is a reason why, you know, that joke, that trope of like everyone wants to be an actor. But I do, like, I come across that a lot where you're just like, everybody does kind of want to be an actor. And it's not because, and I think this film gets to the heart of why. It's like, because everybody wants to be inside, be part of the intimacy and the purpose of it, like the connection that it brings in a real way. And Alma, played by Melanie Diaz, has this great line in there when she's kind of not convincing, but kind of like finally like, hello guys, this is why this is a good idea to get everyone to be in on making these movies. She says they'll become the stockholders of their own happiness, which I thought was a brilliant line. Mm. And that's kind of, I was like, oh, that's what people who are like, I think I want to be an actor. I'm like, I think what you want to be, you recognize that you have been pushed out of what is meant to be an inclusive, community-minded process just by the nature of the market, you know. And they even earlier they do say like, oh, so we just have to adapt to the market. Like the market is meant to push you out of it and make bad art, really. And that this film is so conscious of like, I was like, oh yes, that's why everybody wants to do theater on some level, like or film or that kind of art. They want to participate. I haven't found a single person who honestly deep down hasn't.
Yeah, if you offered anybody the opportunity that Alma gets, you know, to just be in a film that's shooting around your corner, I think they would probably take it. I think most people would probably say absolutely.
Oh, definitely. I can't tell you when I was still in LA and I was doing comedy sketches, like shooting stuff for the internet. Can't tell you how many times we'd be out on the street and just see like a kid or like an older person or whoever and just be like, hey, do you want like one line in this thing? 90% of the time they were like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's go. I mean, granted it was LA, but these were probably not people who were like there to be actors.
Yeah, they're not like, I'm SAG, I'm offer only. Yeah.
Is this a union gig? Are we getting paid scale? What's happening?
Goddamn, I need my healthcare weeks.
Yeah. And I mean, if you've spent any time in theater or let's say in like the comedy improv scene, you know, the verbiage, the terminology you use is like you're playing with people. It's like it was so fun to play. Like we're playing. Like let's find a way to let's play on this scene, or like especially in the improv comedy scene, like people would be like, it was so fun playing with you, and it really is when it's the best, or like when it's at its best. It really does feel like you're a child just playing around.
I want to go back to, Jesse, you were talking about the material conditions that were present in this film. And I do think that was, I just wanted to open up the conversation about naming what those were. Because there were a lot that were like, also like, I'm just thinking about the power, just like the devastation of the power plant itself. They turn it into this super comedic situation, but it's also like not funny because it's also like a very real reality for a lot of working class neighborhoods that are stuck with the toxicity of these like leftover industries. And so in this, Jack Black's character is literally like lives in a trailer next to one. And then one of the big events of the film is he wants to go in. And what exactly does he want to do? He just wants to do
some sabotage.
Just some sabotage, some anarchy. And he ends up getting electrocuted and therefore is magnetized. His physical body is fucked up.
Very Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah.
But even just seeing how like this community is forced, like he goes to sleep with like a strainer on his head. When they're all hanging out by it, they have to wear strainers. Like that's very like I was just like, I was struck by like the reality of like, it's very fucking real. One of the many ways in which these systems are devastating life.
Yeah, and he really refuses to underline it, too. I feel like there is I think Michel Gondry just, like, does such an excellent job of, like, showing these really awful conditions in Passaic, and, you know, and I think his choice to portray it as just kind of normal, I think does the work of underlining how awful and sad that is, that we've just left so many of our cities like Passaic to rot.
It's also a very New Jersey specific thing, like these power plants and these smokestacks. I don't know if you've ever driven through like the Newark, Passaic, Rutherford area, which is where my grandma lived. You like you're on the parkway and all of a sudden you're like, am I in the middle of like an industrial zone? Like this doesn't feel like it should be legal, what I am seeing around me. There's just smokestacks just like billowing shit into the sky. You see all of the power plants, all just like the giant like grids. It's not a great place, and it does not make you feel good ever driving through there. And I mean that like the knocked on effects of that on those communities, not to mention like you're saying, Riv, like the toxicity of that shit is terrible. I was excited, but also depressed to see that was what they chose to center the Jack Black electrification thing around. I was like, oh yeah, that's fucking Jersey as hell.
And it is like, you know, that common like guy, you know, who is very much a conspiracy theorist, who is like, the government set that power plant to fuck with our heads, is so it's dealt with in a way that is very empathetic towards Jack Black's character, which makes Jerry seem fairly reasonable because, you know, it does actually fuck with his head. But it is, it doesn't either deny or kind of confirm Jerry's worst suspicions, but it really presents a strong sense of place and a strong sense of like what the rapid deindustrialization and sort of centralization of industry in that Jersey area does to the local population, not only like with Jerry, but also with every character who has to live around it, you know, including Mr. Fletcher and including Mos Def's character. There's a strong sense that everybody understands what that place is, even though they might not be full-on conspiracy theorists. They do have a very clear understanding of that power plant being a very negative influence on their community.
And they understand how the decades of deindustrialization, plummeting property values, what have you, are not only affecting them materially, like Mr. Fletcher is about to be thrown out of his home and his business and the building that he owns, also the erasure of their history that is tied up in that, and just how unfair of a fucking system this is. I mean, just like the whole time you're watching this guy be like, I've grew up in this building, my family owned this building, this is a historical landmark. It just needs to get repaired. And the fact that there is no system in place, there are no sort of subsidies, there's nothing that the city is offering him to help him out of this predicament. You know, it seems like a no-brainer. Like, oh, like you are from this community, you are part of this community. We will do what we can as the city, what have you, to subsidize these repairs, to give you a little bit more time, whatever. But just how fucking callous it is at the end of the day. And that was some of like the strongest like gentrification messaging in the movie, when like, you know, PJ Byrne comes in and he's like, we're going to build these new condos and transform this slum. Yeah, it was just like really, and I love Danny Glover so much.
A treasure.
Yeah, such a treasure. And a very vocal lefty union guy, we should note. It was very sad to see him go through what he had to go through in this movie.
Yeah, he was solid in this movie. Also so young. It's funny because he was like playing the old guy, but I'm like, he's young. I mean, from what we know.
No, they did try to age him up a little bit.
Yeah.
You can see it in like the makeup and his performance. He's like probably in his 50s, but he's like trying to play late 60s.
There's also a way that gentrification takes shape in just the structure of the movie too. You can really see like, you know, there's no salvation at the end. There is like, one would come to expect of like a traditional Hollywood structure, especially the kind of classic catalyst of like the blank place is in trouble from the corporation. We have to save the blank place. Mm-hmm. One, you know, the ski lodge, the whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And in classic Hollywood structure, you would really just see that place be saved. That would be the last beat of the film. But it's such a beautiful kind of nod to the way the system works, mm-hmm. that he refuses to end the film like that. It is like, yes, the tenants are thrown out of the building. The building is going to be demolished. The city won. The real estate developers won. The contractors won. But you really see a dignity in the people who are affected most by that loss. You really, they humanize and dignify the people who have been set upon by this predatory real estate system in a way that shows us what could be possible on an emotional scale. It is a strange sort of collectivism where even though they have the Jack Black line, and she's a communist, I don't like communists. It honestly could be a little communist at the end, because you have a strange, very American sort of collectivism in the way they dignify these communities.
Yeah, and you get a sense Jack Black's character could be radicalized or raise the class consciousness easily. I mean, and along those lines, I also thought it was I loved the flip where there was this solidarity between sort of like the middle class movie store with the DVDs who comes down, the owner comes down, or just the fact that they try to break in, right? And then he lets them go and then comes down with his projector and joins the community. Like there was none of that necessary competition. Like they didn't, you know, I was thinking about like Good Burger or like, you know, all those tropes where you get lost in that sort of like the mini bourgeoisie who they have to be competitors. And I think that kind of goes along the lines of what you're saying, where there's this feeling of like, wait a minute, they're all coming together. Like they're just starting to recognize how powerful they can be as this community, and how like also the film didn't shy away from like, they're all fucked by this capitalist system. So like even this idea that like, well, the DVD's the big bad guy, you know, Barnes and Noble's the bad guy to the shop around the corner, and you know, it was just all, they didn't even like really go, they played with it and then they were like, not really.
Well, that dude at West Coast Video, he's just a worker, you know?
Yeah.
That's not his franchise. He's
right,
getting
exactly.
exploited. He's probably like, my managers fucking suck. I get paid shit. I like the Be Kind Rewind guys.
I love these guys. And there is this small implication there that he's like sleeping in the porn section because he doesn't have a house right now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's how deeply sad that is. Like he has no home, so he's sleeping at the adult video section of his workplace. It's, you know, you can see you can sense his the feeling he gets of solidarity with Mos Def and Jack Black as they break into his boss's store, where it's like, my life isn't any better than theirs. I just happen to work at a different store.
Yeah, and I guess that points back to kind of what you were saying, Jesse, about like the lack of condescension, which I thought was one of the strongest points in this that we could learn a lot from. It was like a lack of condescension also between these characters, like, which is so much more common than films portray it, I think, that like often people do have a lot more understanding between the working class of those conditions of like, oh, you're sleeping you're sleeping here too. Oh yeah, I can put those connections together. And I thought a place that it was like, I started to talk about this, but where they're like making the Fats Waller documentary, and then Jack Black, who's been like, you're like, Jack Black, how do they tolerate this dude? You know, you get a sense that they're all kind of like kindly tolerating him a little bit. And then like, even when he becomes like, he does such a great job of like kind of towing the line between being like so annoying and egotistical, but they like love him, but they're all kind of like,
he's very much the white guy of this
he's
movie.
the white, yeah, and they're like carrying him along. And then there's a moment where he comes out and he's in blackface because he just wants to be part of the Fats Waller documentary. And I just was like, wow, this is so, the way they handle it, you know, they're like, we're gonna have a conversation about this. Like, everyone knows what's going on. They're like, we're gonna talk about this. And like, that's calling him in. This is so pre-2020. This is so, my note was like, what would Robin DiAngelo say? Oh no. It was just like, oh, that is actually more what I see like the left offering than like is sort of characterized of the left by like this sort of like fear-based liberal idea of like how they co-opt wokeism and then are like, well, that's the problem, so now actually nobody say anything about LGBTQ rights or racism. So it's like such a backlash because it's like so clearly been co-opted for the sake of capital, where like none of that shit exists when you're like, no, this is our guy. Well, we see what's up, but like we gotta talk to him about it, right? Like we're gonna have a conversation because we're all in community together, and that's what community does. And I just was like, that's pretty deep to see right now.
And it's very kind too, and then you see Jack Black's characters kind of accept it. He gets called out. He gets taken outside. Danny Glover just talks to him, and he's like, "Okay." And there's a sort of, again, it ends up being a very positive sort of view of what a theory of change is. You know, there is, and it's like a grain of a theory of change. It's because it's not really like a thing where we get to address the system, but it really shows us how to be in community with people who might not be completely ideologically aligned or have to like learn some things like, you know, don't do blackface. Which, you know, I hope everyone learns at some point.
Yeah, totally. And not to like hit the Robin DiAngelo point too much, but it was just like that all came out. So much of that anxiety was coming out because people wanted to have these conversations without talking about class at all. And you do see like within the working class, the way that race is dealt with in community that's been built where people are coexisting together is so different than in a workplace environment. Like, yeah. Because really that book was framed around like, yeah, inside of a fucking Severance-esque workplace environment where you're sitting people down in this like stale room, not addressing like the differences in power or class, and like, you're gonna have quote unquote these white tears, and here's why you better not have them. And it just is like very like, I see how that blossoms out of like that container, but like inside this, you're like, no, inside most working class environments, that's like not, what are you talking about?
Well, especially because that's his friend talking to him. It's not like the fucking like HR person like taking him like and locking him in a room. There's like a sense of like, you know, when you take the HR-ness of anti-racism out of, when you take away that context, it's actually pretty easy. It's just you have to like, you know, do it on an interpersonal level where you feel like you're speaking as equals. You can't do it in a way where you feel like it is like imposing on people. And that's the very liberal mindset, the very Robin DiAngelo mindset of like, we have to bestow anti-racism from the benevolent HR gods to everyone who works, you know, who obviously everyone works a white collar job from 9 to 5 and needs to be spoken to by the HR department. But it take that away and you actually have a very easy and peaceful process.
Totally. And even Alma does such a great job of like, Alma, I loved her character. It has no problem. Like, we're seeing so many of these things, so many of these also like tropes that you see, especially in these 2008, you know, this era of film, where they never call it out. And she's like, excuse me, like, why the fuck is it always about you guys? Because they're always going back and forth about them. She's like, hello, you know, and she has like this beautiful arc where they call her in to do this line and she ends up directing, you know, being the female director and also standing up to their internalized patriarchal stuff and calling them in. And it's never shame-based or anything like that. But like, they hear her and she becomes a director, and it's like, okay, cool. That's how it can be done.
Yeah, there's a lot of dialectics happening in this movie. A lot of for like someone making a mistake, getting called in, and then learning and growing. I do wish that Jack Black learned a little bit more. I mean, that one moment was good with
he got some work to do.
He has a lot of work to do. I did write down Jerry is the worst because he just throughout from the beginning of the movie, he's the one like he's criticizing Mike for not having any ambition. He's like, I want to get out of this town, this dump. He's doing all of the racist and homophobic tropes of this era. I don't know if I attribute that more to Jerry the character or the movie and the time it was made in, but regardless, he's just sort of set up as like, I don't know, that annoying white libertarian guy who's like, well, I can say whatever I want. Like, don't tell me I can't say this shit. So I wish we got like a little bit more in Jerry's arc where it was, you know, where it was clear that he had like learned some kind of broader lesson.
Well, we start with keep Jerry out. Right?
Yes.
Keep Jerry out. So Jerry's clearly nobody I think sees Jerry. He's never like held on a pedestal. But
that's true. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right.
But like I do think by that, and there's such a great duo too, like of just he's literate, like he can't smell. It's like so silly. But you're right. Like I did feel like the community had Jerry, like Jerry will have to be pulled in. But maybe there was a little bit of like, Jerry did get electrocuted. Like, they're being a little kinder to Jerry because he's so probably gonna like die.
Yeah.
Like walking into a fire. Like he's so. But you're right.
He did pee magnets, you know. Well, it's funny. It's honestly funny you mentioned dialectics because I when I was in on my residency at Mayi, I was doing this thing called learning plays that Brecht did, and I was researching that kind of theater, which if you don't know, the Lehrstücke or the learning plays were this series of short plays that he wrote that were intended to sort of remove the alienation between audience and theater maker. So he would get like members of workers' choirs or students to do these shows. So essentially act in these shows and be part of their creation. He'd bring in choirs, workers' choirs, so that they could sort of take in the ideas of the plays, all of which were rooted in sort of dealing with, you know, he was kind of writing them on the expectation that Germany would be socialist. So sad what happened after that. But you know, these plays were really designed to sort of have people learn ideas of collectivism and socialism through the performing and the observation of theater. And he called that dialectical theater because it really he wanted to sort of redefine the relationship between author and audience to one of like consumer, creator, and a really more of a collaborative relationship. And I see a lot of that in Be Kind, Rewind.
Yeah, that's such a great point.
Just by virtue of what Alma's talking about, of making people
Stockholders
stakeholders in their own happiness. And it is a deeply collectivist idea that I'm not entirely sure if Gondry knew was there or not, but it comes through so beautifully in a way of everybody in the neighborhood both put something into the film where they can contribute something of who they are and what their life is, and everyone takes that away as well. But everyone, it feels like such a collaborative dialectical relationship.
Yeah, loved all of that. Nerding out right now, Jesse. That was so great. No, that's so great. And just like, yeah, I have been having so many conversations about like, what is the solution? How do you kind of change those models in theater? And just in one of the biggest issues in bourgeoisie conceptions is like, well, we're making theater for this, or how do you get them to invest? And like you said, it's quite simple in that sense of like, you invite them in, there has to be a literal investment, and there's nothing like seeing people really give a fuck when it's like they're included in that kind of meaningful way.
Real fast before we get to the awards, I want to talk really quickly about the moment where Sigourney Weaver comes in. And basically the studios have discovered that this shop is making bootleg DIY versions of studio pictures. And they come in with the whole, you've seen the FBI warning at the beginning of the tapes. You know that this is a federal crime. And they confiscate all the tapes and they destroy all the tapes. And just raise this. I mean, obviously, we understand why the studios are doing this, because they're going to crush anybody that's trying to make any sort of money off of their intellectually owned property.
Literally crush.
Beneath a steamroller.
Raise this question for me, which was, who owns art once it is made? I know that within our current system, especially with, American or international copyright laws, we can very clearly point to someone and say, this person owns this art, they own it, and no one else can have it or use it. But if those laws didn't exist, who does own the art? Because I think this movie is such a beautiful representation of how art is an ever-evolving, ever-changing thing that can get riffed on and played with. And it's really, honestly, such a bummer that we have these really almost draconian laws that just say like, hey, we own whatever, Star Wars, and you can't do a single thing with it. I mean, you can. Honestly, in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, you guys, you have to tell them parody law exists, but they didn't know that at the time. But yeah, I just wanted to raise that because I thought it was a really compelling moment in the film.
It was a huge issue in 2008. I remember like, especially on YouTube, there was this huge. I remember on YouTube there were a lot of people who were speaking out about copyright laws and how it was messing with their content creation at the time. And I can't believe I said content creation. I hate this. But I remember this being a huge discussion in 2008, especially like around the use of material that was owned by either big record labels or large studios. And the image of all these films, of all these movies being crushed under the steamroller. It's such a heartbreaking thing. I remember watching this in the theaters and people just like, gasping at watching those films being destroyed. And it is this thing that Brecht is talking about of like, an alienation of the audience from the artist and from the art, where it is a very authoritarian mode of creation, where it is like the studios are bestowing this gift onto you and you have to treat it with respect or else they can take it away from you. And what a a disturbing vision of these, of, you know, destroying the very act of repeating and passing on stories.
It was such a reality check too, watching how this community created these films. Like, nobody, I would be like, they all owned it. Like, it felt truly like they all owned it. And even if it wasn't like parodying anything, it would be hard to be like, so who should we say owns it now? It would just like, it would kind of ruin the whole thing, you know, that they so beautifully put together. And that is just like, that is the soul of why art will always, like, real art will always be revolutionary and resistant towards capital. Because when you can touch on that piece and be fucking honest, you know, about that kind of creation. And of course that's like how it's formed. But I think any true artist, like, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to come up with that without that person, or like anyone who's been, it's like always a collective operation. And the only reason we decide on an owner is because of the rules of capitalism, ultimately, you know. So it's a great question, but I feel like that was probably why this was so moving, because it kind of felt like, what? None of that mattered until Sigourney Weaver appeared, and then it was so like, what? Who was thinking about ownership? What? So disturbing. But of course my note was Sigourney Weaver, exclamation mark, like, of course it had to be Sigourney.
It had to be
They
Sigourney.
just used her so well. There
It was a perfect role.
We have to have a special award or maybe episode where we go back, Frank, and we're like, there's got to be a Sigourney episode, because she's been in so many of our movies, but
So
then there's
many.
like a special era of Sigourney. Like, she shows up perfectly in The Cabin in the Woods. Right? Isn't that Sigourney too?
Yep.
Like,
Shows
just
up in
like,
The Cabin in the Woods.
you're like, yeah, it's fucking Sigourney Weaver is the evil
Ghostbusters.
capitalist.
Working Girl.
Yeah. But like, where she particularly, like, they echo back and they're like, we're going to bring her back as like this very particular representative of like capital in this moment. And she's like, copy, I know the assignment. I'm Sigourney Weaver.
I saw a tweet recently that said, so is anyone else's name Sigourney? That was it.
Uh-oh.
And I was like, you know what?
Should I change everything
question.
and name my child Sigourney?
I think you have to now.
Wow. That would be fucking... I might just
That
put
would
it on
be
the
tight.
list.
And that's called creating community.
She would be the second Sigourney ever.
That is so real. Sig is like a cute nickname.
Oh,
like
Sig
Sig.
is cute. That's very cute.
Sig. I'm going to put it on the list. We'll see how Tommy feels, but
I advocate
if she
for
comes
it.
out like, fuck your anti-capitalism, I'll be like, oh, it's Sigourney. It's definitely Sigourney. And looked her in the eyes. She's born to steamroll over some VHSs. All joking aside, before we leave our Sigourney Weaver moment, there was just this throwaway line that I loved too, where she was saying to Danny Glover, listen, I have a family too. And he's like, what? What does that have to do with a family? Like, I didn't even say anything about a family. Like, it was like such a small line that they were just, I was like, this is so accurate of like how they do it in that like liberal loving way of like, I have a family too. I loved that moment.
Yeah, very United Healthcare CEO Brian
Yes.
Thompson has a family.
Yes.
Energy.
And then Danny Glover's just like, what? What are you talking about? I don't know
I don't have a family. What are you talking about?
what you're talking about. That's it. But now we can move on to awards. I just had to get that piece in there.
No, that was a good one. So, Jesse, we give 3 awards to every movie. Our first award is Best Politics. So this goes to the character with the best politics in the movie. I mean, it's my gut instinct is to say Mr. Fletcher, Danny Glover's character, because he understands like the importance of a history and specifically this community's history to all of the people living in it. He seems to have like really tight, genuine relationships with everyone in the community. Even when he comes back from his trip and is like, no, you guys can't be doing these your own versions. Pretty quickly, he's like, oh no, this is bringing people together. Like I was wrong. He says I was wrong. Yeah, and he's the one pushing for like the Fats Waller stuff. And I don't know, is there anyone else?
I'm going to put Up we don't know his name, but or maybe we do, the from West Coast Videos, who brings over, sleeping in the porn section, brings over the projector.
Sure.
I just thought it was pretty radical to be like, I mean, because he could be like middleman, like when you brought up the point about like what he represents, and like that was pretty like, he chose not to be a class traitor when I think he could have made that move easily, and he could have sent them to jail. I mean, like he could have called, like, to not call the cops on them for like breaking into the video store. I just thought that was pretty cool. You rarely see. Pretty brave.
I honestly, he doesn't have perfect politics, but I would put up Mike specifically for the scene in which he convinces Mr. Fletcher to do the Fats Waller film, where it is like he puts the interest of the community before the interests of like any sort of historicism, because there's a thing of like that Mr. Fletcher has is like, you know, the past is so important to him, and you know, him having lied about Fats growing up in that building is such a thorn in his side for him that initially prevents him from even considering this project. And I think Mike's insistence like this, it does not matter that he didn't grow up in this building. It doesn't matter that it's historically inaccurate. It doesn't really matter that we don't have the right to make these films in a legal sense. All that matters is that we do it, is that we do something to bring these people together and to save this building. It is a very sort of almost anti-individualistic frame of mind for him to be thinking in, which is very polar opposite of both Jerry and Alma, who, you know, Alma's like overcharging her neighbors. That's not very nice of her. But she's a shrewd businesswoman. She's on that grind set. She's a smooth businesswoman. She's girl boss, and Jerry's Jerry. But I think Mike has a very, very strong sense of, you know, once he gets to that place, because it takes him a little bit to get to this point of view, but once he gets to it, I think he really understands what is at stake and what is important for everybody in the neighborhood, not just
I'm sold.
himself.
I'm sold.
Yep. Jesse, that was a great case you just made. Mike wins the Best Politics Award. Very nice.
Congrats,
but
Mike.
love to see that it was a full list of contenders, because that's not always the case. Not often enough.
Usually, sometimes we have to give it to an animal because we're so deprived of anyone with coherent politics.
All right. So the next award, of course, is Worst Politics. Goes to the character with the worst politics in the movie. Sigourney or PJ Burns' character, the real estate developer guy. Yeah.
Pretty standard boilerplate. You know, I only care about developing up this neighborhood, raising the property values. I don't care if I'm kicking you out. I don't give a shit about any of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I give it to him too, because he shakes his hand. He shakes Mr. Fletcher's hand at the end of the film, even though he's still going to tear the building down. I'm just like, you fucking asshole! Like, don't shake his hand.
Yeah, he got a little bit of like having his cake and eat it too, being like, oh wow, this was a really beautiful moment. Yes, I am still going to evict you from your home. All right, that's an easy one. And then our last award is Better Supporting Character. So this goes to the supporting character that this movie should actually be about. I wanted more of the dudes who are, you know, characterized as, I guess, more of like the gang members. I don't think they say that they're in a gang, but, you know, they're like in gang signifying apparel. But they end up having like this really kind of sweet, just like sweet interpersonal dynamic between the five of them. Yeah, they were just so much fun. And I love deconstructing stereotypes, especially in a movie like this, with a sense of humor. I could do much, much more of that. Just like show me these guys at home. Show me them bickering about like who gets to pick which movie, which night. You know, yeah, I really enjoyed them.
They're also the first to say that these films are good. That's my favorite thing about them, is that they kind of catalyze the whole movie by saying like, that wasn't bad. You know, I think they you know, they're not fooled. They know what they are. You know, you see one of them driving up to while they're shooting RoboCop and taking part in
Right.
shooting Jack Black RoboCop.
Great sequence.
But a fantastic sequence. But they really understand the project from jump and are so down and are so enthusiastic about it in a way that's so endearing. So yes, I would absolutely agree. They are on my list of contenders. My other contender was Wilson.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wilson.
yeah.
Who clearly has my favorite line of the movie is amateurs. Is just him glowing at amateurs when Jack Black won't kiss him. And I'm just like, I would watch a whole film about his artistic ambitions.
Yeah, that'd be good. Those are great ones. I felt pretty satisfied. Like, honestly, I felt pretty satisfied with like the community and where it left. I could see more Alma.
Sure.
But I think like it was
Alma
a pretty,
takes Hollywood.
Yeah, Alma takes Hollywood. But I would be worried that any of this would like, if anything, I would want to see like maybe the consciousness raising of Jack Black's character, like you were of Jerry, and maybe like where does the community go from here? But it was pretty like, yeah, I was pretty satisfied, which is rare.
You're right. This is a movie with like very fleshed out supporting cast that all get their own little arc in one way or another.
And I think because the community itself was so, you understood who everyone was to each other, that like it didn't feel like I need to know this, you know, it was like really beautiful. So yeah, we're happy, we're pleased. Well, thank you for picking this film. This was, as you said at the top, this was a gem, Jesse. So
Thanks for watching it with me.
Well, before we wrap, we like to talk to our guests about how, as artists and people, you try to practice your values in your life. For you, we definitely know they're anti-capitalist, lefty, and we talked a little about how you do that in your art. But is there something that you're up to currently that you wanted to share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, my art practice is always, you know, I write about socialist themes. I try and mess with theatrical forms to, you know, sort of covertly teach people about socialist values. I try to make it as subtle as, you know, watching a Marvel film, well, as they try and instill militarism in you. But in my life, I really try to have a material view of politics. And I believe in being involved with an organization. I'm involved with Theater Workers for a Ceasefire right now. We have been organizing for over a year now to both keep Palestine in the conversation in the theater world. And more recently, we've been organizing around PACB, which is the Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, which is it's slow and gradual work, obviously. That's one of the principles of BDS is gradualism. Being part of these campaigns, I think, is like, it strengthens my artwork. It strengthens my own feeling of having community within left spaces. And it strengthens my own view of how things change and conviction in socialism, in anti-capitalism and anti-imperialism.
And Jesse, for anyone in our audience who's just not familiar with BDS or PACB, can you just give a little breakdown on what that is?
Absolutely. So BDS is Boycott, Divest, and Sanction. It is a movement that is organizing to economically weaken the state of Israel. This is not targeting of Jewish people. It is not. I am Jewish myself. We are not. It is not targeting Jewish people. It's not targeting individual Israelis. It is only targeting businesses, and in the case of PACB, cultural institutions that are specifically financed and backed by the state of Israel, or that engage with normalization tactics, which essentially means, in a cultural context, to normalize the Zionist apartheid state. So really, it is about complicity, not identity. There's a huge misconception that goes around, I think partially, you know, due to misinformation by the pro-Israel lobby, that BDS is meant to target Israelis or Jewish people. That's not true. Really, it is about boycotting institutions that are directly, materially complicit in the subjugation of the Palestinians.
That was, thank you. That was really informative.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you for doing that work.
so crucial, especially now. Jesse, where can our audience find you if you would like them to? You can also tell them, don't even try.
You can find me, if you are so inclined, at Jesse Jae Hoon on Instagram and all the socials. No one has my name. Well, actually, Sigourney. Well, my legal name is actually Jesse Eisenberg, which I cannot use because there's another person who works in theater and film.
No
who has that
shit.
name.
Wow.
Yeah. I met him. He's been cool about it. So
that is so funny. I saw him at Alamo a few months ago. He was just like sitting in the lobby, just chatting with a bunch of people. Seemed like a sweetheart.
it's a nice dude. Although we keep going to the theater on the same nights, so our tickets get fucked up sometimes.
Jesse, this was such a joy. Thank you for picking this movie. Thank you for being here. It was so lovely meeting you. And please let us know the next time you have some work going up somewhere, because I would love to come and support.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, happy to support, happy to be here, and would love to have you there.
To get ourselves a treat.
Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And if you want to support the show and get access to our Patreon episodes, the link is in the episode description in your podcast player or at mvcpod.com.
Also, a reminder that we donate our ad space. So if you're part of a leftist or progressive organization and you want to run an ad with us, just shoot us an email at moviesvscapitalism@gmail.com.
For next week, we will be watching the 2009 George Clooney dramedy Up in the Air with special guest Marianne Williamson.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
To get ourselves a treat.